tell your agent to quit calling us and asking for more money. It's non-negotiable now. Get them started again in December.
Mike Gundy is the head coach at Oklahoma State. He's never been shy of expressing opinion.
Yeah, it's a good thought, but it ain't going down like that.
No, probably not. But he has told his guys and their agents, that's what college football is now, their agents are Uncle Clarence or whoever the heck is representing them, Uncle Theo, whoever's calling the shots.
Whatever.
Yeah. Don't call me. We're going to play football.
Okay.
December, we'll start talking money again, but don't call me.
Okay, Coach.
You know, if I've got off to a great start, I need a raise.
No, because I'd be one of those players.
Would you be doing that?
Come on now. 3 touchdowns, Coach. Let's talk.
Bill and Kevin back at the Hall Buick GMC Hall Esidol studio. On that note, Oklahoma State will play South Dakota State this week. They're going to have, for the first time ever, QV codes on the back of their helmets so you can scan it and send them money. Nathaniel Moran is our congressman, U.S. Congressman District 1, and joins us here in studio this afternoon because people are begging you guys to solve this issue. Can you?
Bill, it's great to be here with you, and I'm going to just tell you right now, apparently we cannot solve this issue, and that's unfortunate. I'll talk a little bit about the legislation that's out there and what's pending and some of the thoughts. I think that's really important. You know, I used to think that sports was where I could go for my refuge and my respite from politics, but what I'm finding out clearly is that is not the case. Apparently, politics has found its way into sports.
What if it did go to Congress, could the Republicans and Democrats actually do a bipartisan bill on this? Is that even possible?
Well, they're trying to do that, and that's a really great way to start because let me tell you about the primary piece of legislation that has been worked on this year on the House side. Gus Bilakis out of Florida is trying to get a bipartisan agreement.
Republican or Democrat?
He's a Republican.
Okay.
He's trying to get bipartisan agreement on a way to move forward. There are some sticking points, and I'll talk about those. But here's what his Fair College Sports Act, which is only in draft form, and that tells you hasn't gone that far. They had a hearing over the draft earlier this year, early in 2024, but they haven't even had a final hearing on a final draft of proposed legislation because they can't get to enough agreement. It would say, though, this is what his perspective is. It would protect the NIL rights of players. It would preempt state laws. And right now we got 32 or so state laws out there that deal with NIL rights at the state level, most of which are crafted after the California bill.
Texas has one.
Texas has one too, and we can talk about that as well. Alabama actually undid theirs because once the Supreme Court ruled in 2021 that there were rights out there that could be protected, the NCAA came in with some rules and parameters, and they were actually less restrictive than Alabama's state laws, so Alabama undid their state law. But back to the Fair College Sports Act by Gus Bilakis. He's on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and he's really in charge of this issue on that committee. He wants to ban the pay-for-play by prohibiting boosters, collectives, and other third parties from offering deals in exchange for an agreement by a player to perform in competition action or promotions and not tied to an agreement to actually come to a specific university or not. So they would still have NIL rights, name, image, likeness rights, but it wouldn't be tied to what they do on the field. It would be tied to their name, image, and likeness, or at least it wouldn't say in the contract, you must do X, you must play in X number of games, you must show up. It doesn't say that at all. It wouldn't under this bill. So there's some interesting things around that. It would require transparency, and this is what you see from a lot of the bills going through Congress. Senator Cruz has a bill in the Senate side. A lot of that's focused on transparency, disclosure of the contracts themselves, who's involved, how much is getting paid. Right now, you only have to disclose something $600 and above. And we'll talk about the average NIL deal, by the way. Interestingly enough, the average NIL deal is smaller than you would think. There's a lot of them that make a lot of money out there, but the average deal is $2,500, just under $2,500. If it's just football, you're looking at about twice that much, about $4,400. But if you're excluding football from that, the average deal is only about $1,276 across the board. Now you're going to get
that might be the golf team or something like that, right?
Yeah,
okay,
that's right.
Yeah.
And most people think of folks like Livy Dunn from LSU. She's making $1 or $2 million on her NIL deal, but most athletes do not do that. But what Bilakis' bill also would do is establish an independent commission to set the rules, enforce, and provide guidance to student athletes across the board.
Is it going to come to that?
I think it's going to have to come to that, because you see the disenfranchisement of what was intended to be amateur sports at the collegiate level, and at some point there's a breaking point. Colleges and universities cannot keep up with paying this amount of money out there, and the alternative is collective bargaining agreements with student athletes. That's what the Supreme Court said might be a way to move about it. But Republicans don't want to see it move into an employee-employer relationship where there's collective bargaining and labor unions involved. If we get to that point, now we're looking at just like the professional sports are.
What do you do, W-2 or 1099 these kids? I mean, what would you do?
Yeah, it's the question, and really, but really the essential question is, how do you give them the right? They're adults. How do you give them the right to make some money off their name, image, and likeness? And all the bills that are being discussed in Congress right now are saying we want to reaffirm that right for college kids, but we don't want to tie it to performance. We don't want pay for play. We don't want to ruin the amateur status. And back in the 80s, the Supreme Court, that's how they protected it back then, was to say in dicta, which means not in precedence. They said, well, it's an amateur sport. We want to protect the amateur nature of that sport. Supreme Court came back in 2021, the new Supreme Court by then, and said, no, we're going to look at this really from the eye of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. So legally, the basis of where we're at today comes from an 1890 statute.
Right.
And the Supreme Court saying there's antitrust activity going here under Section 1, which is intended to prevent the fixing of prices across the board.
Well, Kevin and I talked about this.
Yeah.
You and I both kind of we've at times believed almost that the horse is too far out of the barn for
too far out
anybody.
of the barn.
For anybody, you think? I mean, how can you guys get Kevin? I mean,
Well, because you just mentioned the fact that, and Deion Sanders said this last year, they're supposed to be getting paid for name, image, and likeness. They're not getting paid for that. They're just getting paid. So how do you fix that? Because Deion said the same thing last year. And how do you bring that back?
Yeah, I think it gets to a breaking point, and you hear colleges and universities right now even screaming louder and louder year by year, saying you got to help us at the federal level. You got to preempt these states. Really an arms race. And Bill, you and I talked about this, that what the states are doing is they're trying to give their colleges and universities, by the state statute that they pass, a leg up on another state and universities in other states. And at some point, it becomes untenable for all the colleges and universities to bend under that pressure.
Do they have to come to? Do the colleges have to come to you and ask, or do you guys could you just retroactively make the decision? Hey, we got this.
Oh, we can do it. We can do it. But I'm a low government interference and regulation kind of guy. So, but I can tell you, and so I don't want to get involved in a problem that can be solved by the marketplace or the private sector. But I can tell you, the conferences, the NCAA, the colleges and universities, they are all coming to our offices screaming, saying, we need you to help us with this, because we are no longer dealing with these folks, dealing with these young kids as student athletes. Right now, we're dealing with their agents, and we're dealing with the pay-for-play situation. We don't want to see that amateur sport become a professional sport at that level.
Well, you're in a state that loves its college football, okay? I mean, and so I'm guessing you've probably heard from some pretty big names.
Yeah, we have, and I've heard. I can tell you.
Want to throw a couple names out
no,
there?
I'm not throwing any names out
come
there
on
today.
now. Come on now.
This is all a setup, isn't it, Bill Coates?
Yeah, there you
just
go.
got me on here to get some names out there. They really are crying out for help because this last year you saw almost 22,000 students. And this is where the compounding happens. 22,000 student athletes entered the transfer portal. 650 of them were multiple transfers. With the intersection between the transfer portal and the NIL deals, schools cannot keep up with the demand. Kids are taking the money, and then they're fleeing, and they're going through the transfer portal just to get more money to go somewhere else. At some point, that bad behavior is going to stop.
Would it be legal if you guys, one of the things you did, if you do make some rules, that all of this money is put aside and the only way they get it is to graduate? You earn a degree. Is that even legal to do that?
Well, I think there's ways to draft legislation that would incentivize kids to stay and finish their degree. And right now, there's some rules in place that would do that along the way. As long as they're progressing, that can be part of the deal. But
in other words, actually have to be eligible to go to college,
and
have to be a college student.
Yeah, and
see, that's my fear.
I support those notions to say, hey, why don't we provide that incentive, allow them to get this NIL deal, but market based on hey, are you on your graduation schedule? Did you actually graduate? Maybe set that money in a pool or a trust fund so that they can't access all of it or a portion of it until they graduate. Or if they don't graduate, then maybe that's used for the sports that aren't paid as much, perhaps. I mean, there's different ways we can go about it. We want to make sure that we remain focused on the academic nature of why these kids are there, because most of them, even if they go to professional athletics, most of their life is going to be outside of athletics, and we want to prepare them for their future and their lives. We would hope that the marketplace would take care of this, but it doesn't look like the NCAA or the conferences or the schools are going to be in a position to handle the legal problem.
When I was 17, 18 years old, thankfully I come from a good family.
Right.
I know you did. He did too. So my parents would have probably, if I'd come across $1 million, somebody done
You would
$1
have had some
million.
structure,
There
some
would have been,
direction.
my dad would have grabbed me by the ear and said, "No, we're not doing that.
Right.
You don't need that." Okay. I mean, you're probably the same way, but a lot of these kids are in a situation where they have no guidance. I mean, isn't that there's not much way you can legislate that, is there?
No, and I don't blame them for trying to get after the money when they get it. And a lot of this came about as a result of the greed, frankly, of the NCAA and the colleges and universities that were making millions of dollars off of these student athletes, and those student athletes were struggling. They didn't have time to get a job. Most of them were coming from poverty. They needed additional stipend or money to supplement.
Which they got.
Well, not to
later on, in the
later
last
on,
5
but
or 6 years. Yeah.
you know, the amount of money that's going through college sports, those folks that were taking that money in.
So in theory, you're all behind. You're okay with NIL in theory, then, right?
I'm okay with NIL in theory because I think there's some constitutional right there to your name, image, and likeness, but there needs to be guardrails to ensure that there is the ability for these students to stay focused on their education, make sure this amateur sport, and you can do that appropriately through statute.
All right, our Congressman Nathaniel Moran is with us here in studio this afternoon talking about NIL. I know we're about out of time. So what happens now, man? From your point of view, what happens next now?
Well, we've got to get to a point where there is more pressure from the outside on Congress to do something. Congress doesn't do anything until there's pressure from the population, from the constituents that they represent. So when the constituents stand up and say, "I've had enough. I want you to actually get something done for NIL," that's when something will happen. That's when both Democrats and Republicans will say, okay, let's craft something that's workable moving forward. Until that point, I can tell you Congress is going to be focused on other things that they're hearing from their constituents. So constituent pressure is the number one thing that gets Congress moving.
More than from a Greg Sankey from the SEC or the guy with the Big 12 or any of those guys, more from voters rather than big wigs in college athletics?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the commentary from the athletic directors and the commissioners, but you know, I only represent a few of them. And the people that I care about, the people that I'm there to represent, are the 767,000 people in Northeast Texas in the 1st District of Texas. They're the people whose priorities I need to follow. And until this becomes a high enough priority for them and for others across the United States, it won't move through Congress.
Anything else you want to say about NIL that we didn't cover?
It's complicated. And again, I just want to say, Bill, thanks for addressing this topic. This is a situation where I wish the free market could handle it. I hope that it can. I hope the NCAA would step up and just do its job.
They can't.
I don't think they're going to do that.
Ain't happening.
They're crying out because of the state-by-state differences in legislation. That's the only reason the federal government likely needs to step in. I hope we step in with a lighter hand to allow these deals to happen, but in a way that keeps the academic focus and the amateur focus of college sports.
Appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks so much.
All right, Nathaniel Moran, our Congressman, U.S. District 1. He's a busy guy right now for obvious reasons, but this NIL thing is gonna land in his lap. I've been kidding this guy. Have I been riding you on this for weeks now?
You have, and I've been preparing for this thing for a while too.
I appreciate you, buddy. Thanks a lot. Nathaniel Moran in studio with us this afternoon. It is coming up on 4:36. Rangers are idle tonight. Cowboys are in the process of doing a deal that'll make CeeDee Lamb even richer than some of these NIL deals. 4 years, $136 million. For the Cowboys wide receiver as we play, 13 days before the start of the season?
Man, yeah.
Football season's here, baby. 92.1 FM, the team, and the Team Sports Radio mobile app powered by the Kelly Community Federal Credit Union.